Okay, so I think we're going to get through the fourth protection and maybe do a little bit more, and then we're going to take a break for a bit. So the last one is elderly. I just want to go back to this. Do you see that we are still only talking about asserting rights? We haven't spent any of our agencies' scarce money on helping them out or knocked on any other doors where we know there's little pots of money that are very scarce. We don't want to knock on those doors unless we have to, and we will get there. And so I'm on the fourth protection of the four protections listed on the yellow sheet, eligibility for key protections. So the fourth one is elderly. How many of you work with seniors? Yes, no, a little bit? A little bit some. So, okay, sometimes I'm in a room where it's all elder advocates and I spend a lot of time on this. Here the rules got better again, so if you've heard the rule, I will flag where the rules got better within the last year or so. This rule, strangely enough, is not literally a protection against termination, but in practice it works as a termination against termination. So let me explain that. This rule says, remember the chart where I had day 1, day 27, day 45? The company goes through that. They don't need to go ask somebody's permission to shut you off. It's just so, you know, in some states you can't foreclose on a home without going to court. In Massachusetts, I think you actually can. It's kind of like that scheme. You don't have to go anywhere and get permission to shut someone off, except for seniors. So what this rule says, and by the way, it's not on page 69. It's actually a separate rule from infant, serious illness, and winter moratorium because it's not protection against termination. It starts on page 76 of the Gray Book. And says the department shall not approve an application for termination of service unless it goes through certain steps. So if all adults in the household are over 65, they can claim elderly status. And the way the rule got better is it used to be everyone in the household had to be over 65. So the grandparents who took in the grandkids, which is obviously not an uncommon phenomenon, they wouldn't have elder status because there's someone under 65. We pointed out to the department that, gee, your telephone rules say all adults in the household have to be over 65. How come your electric and gas rules, those seniors would lose their protection if some kid moves in with them? So they changed the rule about a year ago. And so the requirement is every adult has to be over 65. Now, I need to point out the 67-year-old who's married to a 62-year-old doesn't work. That 62-year-old is an adult. But if both or all adults are over 65, they claim elder status. A 67-year-old married to a 62-year-old, that household cannot claim elder protection because the rule is all adults have to be over 65. The rule is not if there's a single person over 65, it's sufficient. This rule is so new, I forget if it's minor was defined as 18 or 21. It's one or the other, but I don't remember which. That young person doesn't need to be a relative. It can be absolutely anybody. So there are situations where some friend of the family, the grown-ups have died, and you're taking in a friend of the family who's 14 years old. You still get the protection. It doesn't matter how people are related as long as the person's below the age. This book is a little too old. I don't have the new reg handy. I always forget if it's 18 or... It's a perfectly good question. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. Okay, so the companies send out forms as a bill stuffer at least once a year, I think maybe twice a year. So all the seniors have to do is fill out the form. By the way, I think those forms ask for Social Security number. I don't think you have to fill that out, but the forms may have Social Security number as one of the lines on it. In fact, my release form used to have Social Security number. I think I took it off that authorization for release of information. So they fill it out, and then what the rule says is the department has to investigate, and another department, the Department of Elder Affairs, has to be notified. And they have to consider several things, including efforts the company has made to collect payments, and really anything else that appears relevant. In practice, companies don't file that request to terminate someone who's over 65. When they code you as elderly, they don't try to shut you off. However, something else happens that you really need to advise the seniors of if you're working with them and they're asserting this. So in Massachusetts, about 70% of people own their homes, maybe a little less, somewhere in the 60s, and about 30%, maybe a little more, are renters. However, among seniors, even low-income seniors, more than 50% own their homes. Anyone know what happens if you assert senior protection? They take a lien on your house. Because I haven't met any 65-year-old yet who gets younger. So once you assert the protection, they know that you're going to get the protection for life or until you move. And so what they'll do is the companies routinely go to court and sue for a judgment that the money's owed. Pretty easy thing to prove. We sent bills, they haven't been paid. So there's not a lot of defense to the claim that the money's owed. And when you owe someone money as a result of a judgment, the person, the creditor who extended that credit to you, can put a lien on your property if you own a home. And so there may be a homestead exemption, and that's almost irrelevant because the companies are never going to, quote, execute on the lien. You could force the sale of the house if you're a creditor and you get a lien. The companies know they're going to be here for the long term. They just sit and wait until the senior moves or the senior dies. So it's not going to have an immediate impact, but I just want to walk through what the impact can be. So let's say you're 65 years old and your spouse is 65 and you assert this protection, and I'll throw in that you heat with gas. Anyone know the life expectancy of a 65-year-old? Want to take a guess? How much? 25. Very good. I think it's 22 years. And it's somewhere in that range. So if you're 65, just average life expectancy, you could live to 100, but average life expectancy, you could be there for another 20 years. If you don't pay your bills, you don't pay your gas bill for 22 years, something else you need to know here. A judgment in Massachusetts carries interest at the rate of 12%, which means even if you started paying the bills, whatever you owed would double every 7 years or so. So if you, and I actually had one of these recently, I actually had a reverse mortgage lender wanted my help to clear up a bill that was, I forget how big, in the range of $100,000, because the senior had asserted the protection, not paid the bills, and that accrues interest at 12%. So if seniors are thinking about this, you just need to advise them where it's heading. Most of us do not like to be sued, even if you know, okay, so they're going to sue and get a lien. And there's a real cost in the interest rate. So for a 65-year-old, a lot of the equity in the house could get eaten up. So that means whoever the heirs are of the house, often the kids, are going to be affected. You know, if you're 87 years old and you probably think you're not going to live that long, maybe it's not that much of a bite into the equity of the house, but you just need to disclose this to the senior, that it's not that hard to figure out who owns a home. The utilities can figure that out. They use collection firms that then just routinely go out and get those liens on the property. So you do need to know that about senior protection. The department also changed the rule in an interesting way. Again, technically you could get shut off if you're not a low-income senior. Department added a new rule that says if you're a low-income senior, period, you can't be shut off. Company can't even ask for permission to shut you off. But those really, in my mind, collapse to the same result. Even if you're not low income, you put in a piece of paper that says everybody's over 65 who's an adult, they're not going to shut you off. So it's worth making a couple of points here. One I said I'd make a few times. Whenever anybody has a protection, they need to understand that the bills aren't going away. So we didn't wave our magic legal wand and make the bills go away. We just took away one collection tool, which is they can't shut you off. They can still send you bills, you still owe them money, and you could be sued in court. Now, I think the companies do that most for seniors because seniors often have the house asset. I don't know if the companies might think, well, a lot of the younger people, there's no asset to chase, so we're not going to go sue them. But you know, you could be sued asserting any protection if you keep paying 0, 0, 0, 0. So it's another reminder that paying 0 is not a good strategy when you have a protection. It's a particularly bad strategy for the winter moratorium. I was just in this meeting yesterday with all the credit and collection managers, right? The moratorium's ending. What are they going to do when the moratorium ends in a month from now? It's perfectly rational behavior. They're going to roll up the termination machinery and they're going to go after the people who pay 0, 0, 0, 0. They're going to be way more willing to make payment arrangements with people who tried to pay something during the winter.